Welcome to the Classical Gabfest, a weekly discussion about the ever-changing world of classical music. I'm your host for this week, William White, and with me as always are Tiffany Liu and Kensho Watanabe. This week we've got the first of our summer minisodes, wherein we'll take a closer look at one broad topic in the world of classical music. Our focus today will be on programming, but first we'd like to start with our prelude segment. So, Tiffany, what do we have today?
This week we are playing a round of everyone's favorite game, Match the Interpreter. If you search online for a Beethoven or Mozart symphony, you'll come up with literally hundreds of different performances. And in the world of classical music, we like to think that every individual artist brings their own personal spin to the interpretation of works such as these. But the question is just how audible are those interpretive fingerprints? In this game, I'm going to play the same excerpt as performed by 3 different interpreters, and it's going to be up to our contestants to see if they can match those clips to the 3 interpreters listed. This week, the focus is going to be on string quartets. We are going with 3. They are Kensho's favorite, the Dover Quartet, the Borodin Quartet, and the Emerson String Quartet. Emerson, of course, has like a long history, so I'll tell you that the Emerson recording is circa 1997.
Well, I'm very glad that Kensho is here because I am going to be relying on him entirely.
This may be easier than it sounds on the face of it. I'm hoping. I tried to choose recordings that would not be. Yeah. Anyway, this is a tricky one. I don't know how you guys put together like the orchestral ones, but if there's a world in which that's like kind of maybe even a little bit trickier to hear to interpretive fingerprints than the orchestral ones that we've been doing lately, it might be chamber music. But I was really trying to find some that would make this not as scary as it sounds. So we'll see.
So Kensho, what can you tell me about these 3 quartets so I have something to hang on while I'm listening to them?
So the Borodin Quartet and the Emerson Quartet are long-standing quartets. Emerson is a truly American string quartet. I think Borodin, just also based on their name, I think they come from Russian players. I mean, obviously, I think the Borodin Quartet has existed for a long time, so I'm sure the members have changed. Even the Emerson Quartet has switched out its members. The Emerson Quartet I associate very much with like this very direct, dare I say, like machismo type of American school type of string playing, where it's just kind of in your face. There's not a lot of like refinement's not the right word, but they don't really play in the subtleties in this. It's a lot about, you know, they at some point started to play standing up in concerts and stuff like this, so they have this kind of soloist, let's say, mentality to how they play in a string quartet. Borodin I would associate a little bit more with more of like a traditional string quartet. And then the Dovers are very interesting because they all went to Curtis and studied with members of the Guarneri String Quartet, and they have basically really kind of taken their approach at first when they were starting out to really kind of model themselves after the Guarneri String Quartet. So it's very interesting that we're kind of examining essentially what's like 3 of the longest standing string quartets, with just the Dover Quartet being like kind of like the newer version of the Guarneri String Quartet. So it's kind of an examination of the styles of the Guarneri, Borodin, and Emerson string quartets, let's say. In terms of like, if you want a huge contrast between American string quartets, boy, if you listen to Emerson string quartet recordings and then go to like a Guarneri string quartet recording, it's so different in terms of the approach to sound. So I'm hoping that what we hear is something that is in line with what I'm saying right now, but never know.
Wow. Thank you, Kensho. That was amazing. That was a great primer on this. So I feel at least that I have some something to hang on to. And what are we listening to?
Oh, this is the beginning of Beethoven Opus 95, the Stereoso.
Oh, this should be relatively, hopefully easier than another excerpt, I think.
Okay, here we go. Next one. And finally.
My gut is in order Emerson, Borodin, Dover.
That's exactly what I had. Given the criteria that you gave me, I thought that it started extremely aggro. The first one was very fast. I thought it was just very in your face. The second one was slower, airier, and also like poorer recording quality. Like, you heard much more room tone. And so like that could have been some Soviet Melodia recording or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then the last one, I mean, the sonics were so much cleaner. So, since Dover is the more, the newest of the quartets, I thought that just for that reason.
Yeah.
It might be, but you probably heard many things that I didn't hear. So what else did you hear?
No, that's basically it. I mean, I was listening for just knowing the Dovers. There is a certain way that the cellist like Camden plays on those like rising arpeggios, and I was like, oh, I could see Camden playing it that way. I kind of imagined the people playing, and I'm like, oh yeah, that could be believable in that way. So it's more about my personal associations, I guess, with the players in the quartet. But yeah, exactly what you said. Like just the second one was so much more stodgier than the outer two. So that seemed to kind of go in line with what I imagined Borodin to play. And then it was just a matter of, I don't know. Yeah, like you said, the first one being what I would expect Emerson to do if they were playing this piece. So yeah, but could be surprised. Interesting that we both landed on the same thing. So.
Well, yeah, and I'll believe anything. So
maybe I just led you astray this whole time.
Yeah. No, you guys nailed it.
Yay!
Oh wow, Kensho, bravo you! I have to say, because you gave me the listening rubric and you were spot on. So great.
Yeah, I think there's something about old school quartet playing that I think is really fun because you can tell, well, first of all, some of these ensembles are old enough to have like several decades worth of recording histories and all these that have different fingerprints. And then second, like, I think something different happens when four people get together and work on something that can be different every iteration that they sit down and do it. I think that's one of the cool things about chamber music. And so, I thought this would be harder than it was for you guys, but no, you guys completely nailed it. Emerson, Borodin, and then Dover. That just about does it for this week's Prelude segment, but before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our listeners that we do periodic listener-generated Name That Tune rounds, so we invite you to try and stump us. Check our show notes where you'll find a link to the form where you can upload a 30-second clip of an unidentified piece of classical music for us to try to identify. And with that, we move on to our discussion topic for the day. So, Kensho, what are we talking about?
Today's Minisode discussion topic is programming. As conductors, the three of us have been responsible for designing concerts in a variety of contexts, from educational to community to professional settings, and in concerts intended for a variety of different audience expectations. Programming has been a major theme of the GABFest going all the way back to our very first episode when we discussed the Beethoven question, namely, that in programming the work of an oft-heard composer such as Beethoven, you might delight some portion of your audience with their favorite music, but you're also necessarily removing an opportunity to present music by a less commonly heard compositional voice. So, as a gateway into broader questions of how we program, whether we prioritize thematic concepts or musical flow or social ideals, we thought that we'd each bring a program that we've programmed in recent years and drill down into the details of how we made our decisions and what we came up with. So, Will, I guess I see you want to lead off here, so why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I've chosen a program that I was particularly happy with. This was from my first season as the music director of Harmonia, and it was performed on November 3rd, 2018, and it was called Valor and Remembrance. So this was right around, that first 2 weekends of November, you get All Souls Day, and then the week after that, you have Veterans Day. So it's sort of a time for memorialization, at least in my mind. A lot of churches perform requiems right around then. And this program is something that I was really happy with because, as you guys know, my group is a chorus and orchestra in one, so that gives me a lot of sort of fun freedom in terms of what kinds of mediums I program. And in this case, I got to do a little bit of everything. So I've got some orchestral music, I've got some choral a cappella music, I've got music that combines them both, a concerto, all sorts of things. So I'll just say what the program is. This was all music about World War I, all composers who were affected in some way by World War I. So it starts off with Lily Boulanger, her piece Pour les funérailles d'un soldat, so for the funeral of a soldier. Then it goes to Paul Hindemith String Quartet Number 2. So this was just performed by our string principals. And Paul Hindemith was a soldier in the Prussian army in World War I. Then it's Maurice Ravel's Piano Concerto for the Left Hand, which, as I'm sure you guys know, was written for a pianist who lost his right arm in World War I, Paul Wittgenstein. Then, after the intermission, a piece by Gustav Holst called The Ode to Death, which is written in the aftermath of World War I. And then Hubert Parry, who was an English composer who did not serve in World War I. He was far too old, but he had many students who went off to serve in World War I, and they all died. And so this was like a memorial piece. This is an a cappella choral work called There Is an Old Belief from his Songs of Farewell. Then the concert finishes with Ravel again, La Valse, which is sort of a paean to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It's all about like the rise and fall of the Habsburg Empire, which came crashing down with World War I. That was basically the end of that era, which lasted many hundreds of years. So this is a program, I mean, not all of my programs are quite so strongly thematic and sort of museum curated as this, but I love doing that, and I thought that I got to represent a lot of different styles of music within a very contained. I mean, this music was all written within 4 years of each other, and yet you see a variety, and yet it's a variety of responses to the same event. So, I love giving an audience that kind of intellectual stimulus about listening, as people respond to each other and respond to one thing.
And Will, in a program like this, how do you pace your talking during the course of the concert?
Yeah, so there are 6 pieces, and none of them is particularly long. I would say that the longest piece on here is the Piano Concerto for the Left Hand, which is 20 minutes, maybe not even. So with 6 pieces, I came out and conducted right away, and then I talked in between the 3 pieces on the first half, so that's 2 talking moments. And then I think I talked in between the 3 pieces on the second half. So that's another 2 talking moments. So that's 4 talking moments interspersed between 6 pieces. And I try to keep my talking actually pretty, you might not believe it from this podcast, but I try to keep my talking actually pretty contained.
When you say short, I want to know how short.
No, pretty short. I really plan very carefully what I'm going to say, and I condense it.
Yeah, Will, if there's an example in my head that exists every time I want to speak to an audience, it's actually you. Having seen you work in front of an audience, that is what I aspire to when I write my patterns. And I have trouble motivating myself. I remember you're telling me at one point, maybe this was way back when I was a baby conductor in Maine, about how nervous I was to introduce my very first pops conducting assignment, which we all have to do. And, your advice was to practice. And so I got in the car and I literally said my patter out loud to myself for probably 50 times. I drove up and down Route 1 and just said it to myself a bazillion times. And I hated every single second of it. I hated it so much. Do you, I guess all this is leading up to, do you write stuff out? Do you say it to yourself until it feels natural? What do you do?
I jot down points to talk about. And, the thing is like what I say in a concert it's something that I've thought about for a long time, because like I had to program this, like months and months and months before like we even started rehearsals. So I knew what the flow was. Like I knew what the whole organizational principle of this concert was. So because I've done all of that, what I say to the audience is very natural because I'm just basically explaining how I came up with what I came up with and why these pieces interact with each other in the way that they do. But I'm sure that I would have written down a couple of points. I don't take notes with me on stage. And Kensho and I have talked a lot about this in terms of talking because Kensho has done a lot of pre-concert lectures, as have I. And to me, it's like, Tiffany, I think you did the right thing of practicing talking rather than writing and memorizing because, talking is talking and writing is writing. And you can tell when somebody's reading something, even if they memorized it.
Will, I just want to add one more thing because like you said, like it's so much easier to talk about a program that you feel passionate about because you've put it together. Mm-hmm. I've done many shows where I've had no say in the programming, yet I have to sell it from the stage. And I find that to be so much more difficult in terms of trying to figure out what the flow is. I find myself taking more time to kind of figure out what the flow is and bullet point and all of this to make sure I hit the key words that I need to hit for a program that I didn't program because I think that you have no skin in the game for that,
Kensho, that's why I'm really looking forward to getting to your program because I know that you are much more frequently, probably than Tiffany or I, in the position of having to really negotiate what goes into these programs. Whereas, like me as a music director, I mean, I'm not going to program something that like only I like and that the whole group will revolt against. I mean, I'm not just going to do my dream all Schnittke and William White program.
Yeah, I know exactly. It's coming at some point.
But Kensho, where I've been in that position is doing those pre-concert talks for the Chicago Symphony, for the Cincinnati Symphony, the Seattle Symphony, where that can easily be a program that I don't care for at all. And yet I feel that it's my job to get the audience pumped for what they're going to hear, or at least put them in the frame of mind so that they are in the best possible place to receive positively what they're going to hear. I mean, I really feel that that's my job. And so, I try not to oversell things, but I try to bring out the most interesting bits and make the most sense of a program that might not make so much sense.
Yep.
Well, that was fun to talk about my thing. Tiff, looks like you're next on the docket here.
Yeah, so I dithered for a long time about which program to bring because like the program that you have in many different parts, obviously the more selections we have on a piece, the more opportunities there are to exercise your sort of programmatic creative vision. And I have two of those programs, which I'm very, very proud of, full of shorter pieces that kind of go together in a cool thematic way. I think I've talked about them on the podcast though, and I certainly have talked about them in my job interviews recently. So I'm actually I'll allude to them if you want to talk about them as well. But the one I want to talk about has a little bit more of a traditional parameter that I was forced to work within. So what happened was I was invited to guest conduct a concert with a kind of quasi student / pro orchestra based in the university that had I had to do 2 concerto winners on it. But the rest of it was mine to do as I wanted. Mm-hmm. So the first of these concerto winners was just the first movement of Shostakovich's second piano concerto in F major, which is kind of like just cheerful martial kind of movement. And then the other was the Keiko Abe marimba concerto called Prism. Cool kind of fireworksy 20th century, like very showy, like 13-minute thing. So what to do around this? What I ended up putting around it was Beethoven's Fifth in the second half. And then I started the program off with Martinu's Memorial to Lidice.
Oh, I have many times considered the Memorial to Lidice. I think that's a very cool piece and very moving.
I don't know this piece at all. Huh.
So it's a very cool memorial piece. It's really impactful and atmospheric. It opens with this kind of like vast chasm kind of chorus, and you can kind of see like a bazillion octaves in a lot of overlapping, clashing chords. It's about 8 minutes long, and it is a statement on the massacre of Lidice, which was the Nazis' way of avenging the assassination of SS leader Reinhard Heydrich. Otherwise known as Heydrich the Hangman. And so he got assassinated, and the Nazis came in and they wiped this town off the map completely. I mean, it didn't exist. And they ended up rebuilding it. Some some distance from where I originally stood, and there's a very horrifying looking memorial statue of a bunch of children with like this look on their faces, which tends to be, you know, the poster image for any program that includes this piece. You know, I debated for a while because this was a job interview program for me. And so I'm thinking, like, do you really want to start off a job interview with this piece? It's a little bit, and I decided it was the right move, first of all, because obviously in the first half we had these two concerti, which were very bright, optimistic pieces. So I did not feel like starting off with that piece would be like too pessimistic, too dark, which otherwise is a consideration in a program that otherwise has Beethoven 5, which is kind of from dark to light kind of trajectory. So that got assuaged. And then the other thing is that at the very end of this Lidice piece, there's actually a very explicit reference to the Beethoven 5 bum 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 bum. It actually comes out in the horn part. And you take, you know, a good 8 minutes to get there. But, you know, after all this darkness that has been slathered through the piece and these kind of slashing chords, from the middle of the orchestra is bum 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 bum. And kind of leads to finally we get to what turns out to be a C major ending. So I just thought it was a cool parallel, these two pieces flanking the two student concerto competition winners, who ended up being, of course, the stars of the show. I mean, like, their families were there, like the whole school turned out to support them. So like there was enough positivity for the program to withstand that kind of a programmatic choice, which I thought was a bold one. So, you know, programming it's like the engineering, what's the adage that they, you know, it's easier to come up with, you come up with better and more creative and more tight, elegant solutions when some impositions or some restrictions are imposed on you, which is often the case when we get to program things, right? I mean, it's not just your sandboxes. You have concerto winners, or the size of the hall, or the size of the percussion section that you may get, or the fact that the gong broke, or the, you know, the fact that you have to include, you know, some opera selections or whatever. You know, there's all these restrictions, and it's fun to view those restrictions as opportunities.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Tiffany. And yeah, I think that a concerto is very often the main sort of limiting factor. And so often the concerto is not in any way integrated into the flow of the concert. You know, I mean, oftentimes, you know, conductor receives like as a fait accompli what the concerto is going to be, and then they choose the framing works, you know, the piece before it on the first half, and then the big symphony on the second half. And those might respond to each other in some way, but then often not. And frankly, I think that, you know, I mentioned that doing these pre-concert lectures for like the Chicago Symphony, I often found myself really at a loss to explain a program. And I have to think that that's because with the Chicago Symphony, there's no limits. That is just a sandbox. There's no concern about the gong being broken. There's no concern about any logistical thing. Anything the conductor wants will be done.
But then it is interesting to think of the concerto as a starting point for your program was. I mean, so when I did my stint with the community orchestra, that was also the thing that I would put into place the earliest. Yeah. And so another program that I'll just tell you because it's only 3 pieces long. Another one where I started with was the Defy Nights in the Gardens of Spain. And so then I made it into a kind of a nocturne program. I started off with Eine Kleine, and I went to Debussy 2 nocturnes, and that was the program, 1, 2, 3. And that was one of the programs I'm most excited about, actually. The Defy piece is so gorgeous.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's to the best of the program when the concerto can be integrated, you know, by far. But it's just like, you rarely see it, I would say. So, Kensho, like I said, I'm really curious about your experience with programming, where you, I think, probably have a lot of constraints, not so much about logistics, but mostly because you're guest conducting a lot. You're dealing with artistic administrators who have a lot of their own priorities. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Like, how does that world of negotiation go? Maybe before you even say your program.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm in this interesting place where I'm not a music director of an orchestra. I don't really have a regular ensemble I'm conducting. So every programming experience is a unique one. And I've had many variations on a theme here where I'm told exactly what I'm told to do. Like, exactly, it's like, here's your program for this concert, whether that is just sent through my management. And so like my manager has had some say in like, okay, this is what we want Kensho to do before he does it somewhere else too. So like there are a lot of people kind of controlling in a way, you know, what I'm going to be doing. in a program. I picked this particular program because I had some say over how it was structured, but how it worked out was very interesting. So I'm bringing a program that I did just recently, a few months ago with the Charlotte Symphony. And their system was very interesting. They asked me to submit 3 programs that I would like to conduct about a year and a half out. And this this program is actually like a mishmash of the 3 programs that I submitted.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like you have say, but we're just going to arrange them in the way that we want to. So the program that I conducted was we started out with Anna Klein's Within Her Arms, which is a very small, just string-only piece. I think it requires, 10 musicians. Something like this is very small. I really love programs that have very different instrumentations throughout the program. I find that like a meal, like if this, like everything is so thickly orchestrated, I don't know, my ears get tired. So I try to kind of build orchestration or do some kind of big contrast. And then the program that I submitted was with Anna Klein and then ending with Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony, kind of bookending maybe a theme of loss or tragedy or something like this. And so the middle piece, I actually wanted to do, I also enjoy programs without soloists. No shade to soloists, but it's sometimes nice to just have a purely orchestral symphonic program. So I thought it would be great to include Haydn's Trauer Symphony in the middle. So we get this like very different contrasts. So it would have been a very depressing evening, but I thought it would be
yeah, we all chose our like most bummer programs to do on this thing. That's
I think we were trying to like be overly philosophical as we were trying to do this Minisode, I guess. And then the Schumann Piano Concerto, the Clara Schumann Piano Concerto that ended up on the program was part of another program I suggested with, I think, Brahms 4 or something very kind of cookie cutter. The thing with second half pieces as a conductor that's guest conducting, you're basically locked into the Brahms and the Tchaikovskys and any of those super normie pieces, not just because the orchestra themselves would rather have something that they can kind of sell, but also these are just big pieces in the canon that as a young conductor, you just have to like get in your repertoire. So I hadn't done Tchaikovsky's 6 yet, so it was just a great opportunity to do so. It's a very sad way to like think about how these subscription programs for main orchestra, big orchestras are put together. But frankly, the way that the ecosystem is now, you can't just do the programs that you want and in some ways be taken seriously, because they want to look at if you've done Mahler symphonies or if you've done a Brahms symphony or if you've done a Tchaikovsky symphony. They don't look at whether or not you've done a Florence Price symphony, for that matter. It would be interesting, like they'll be like, oh, like this person knows the Price symphonies, but the ecosystem's not there where people think that you're ready for the big time if you've done a Florence Price symphony.
Do you think that's changing at all? I mean, do you think that that would come more of a selling point, that you have a broader repertoire? Because I mean, like, I think that we've talked about this a little bit, like the Florence Price symphonies are becoming fast a part of the repertoire. Like they're being performed all over the place. So there's got to be some demand for conductors who know this music.
Yeah, and I've also seen Florence Price orchestral excerpts now show up on audition lists as well. So it's becoming something that's part of the tradition, part of the canon, much more so than it was before. But at the end of the day, like I said, every orchestra programs very differently. And so I can't necessarily say that there is a broad trend that people are going to take it or continue to take it seriously, let's say.
So here's another question for you, Kensho. In these situations where you have little to no control over what's going on, do you find that constraining or freeing? You know, because in a way it's like, well, I'm just going to do what they tell me to do and I'll do my best job at it. Or do you find it like, oh, God, I don't want to do this again, or this is not something I believe in? How do you feel about that?
I mean, I do like Tiffany said, like working within a constraint, because it does kind of give you some parameters that it kind of narrows down the choices, because I'm the kind of person that's like, oh my gosh, there's just literally, I can choose anything. That's like too much for me sometimes. Like I'm just like, oh, I don't know like where to go with that. So it's nice to have some parameters. What I find really discouraging sometimes is I've had this experience with some orchestras where I'm sure that the request is somewhat in earnest, but like I've gotten requests to suggest programming, and then the response has been, okay, well, thank you for your suggestion, but we're going to go with this. Like just completely like ignoring what I had suggested.
No, it's possible they didn't ignore it, but that they took it into consideration and then there was a different priority. I mean, because I think that that's where it really boils down to is priorities, you know? Because I mean, like we would all love to do the perfect program every time that is like seasonal, that has like representation, that is musically flowing, that, you know, ends with a bang or like does something perfect. But like that program doesn't exist, and it certainly doesn't exist on every concert that you're going to do. And if you did that, it would be kind of boring, you know?
Right. But also we have to keep in mind that to come up with a thoughtful program like both of you did, it takes time. Like it takes time to research, to kind of really figure out and kind of tinker with. And the biggest thing that is a challenge for me is not the parameters like this, but it's just the time frame in which these asks are coming in. Mm-hmm. So I recently had a not so great experience where I got an email requesting that I program something for a couple seasons from now, where they asked me to put together a program, and it was a long email that said, okay, these are the pieces that you cannot do because they've already been programmed in the subscription series. We have this amount of instrumentation, but for this other concert, we're using that complement. So we would like to use a smaller complement, but we can add maybe 2 or 3. It was the most complex, like personnel parameter that I've ever seen in my life. And then I had received that email as I think I was about to leave to come to Charleston, where I am now. So I was like on the plane. So I left the email for like a day or 2 or 3 or something like this. And then I get an email back saying, we need this program today. And I'm like,
oh my God.
First of all, this is a program that is for...
Yeah, this is not an immediate where they have to like be putting the roster together tomorrow.
But it's one of those things where the fact that I knew that I was going through this orchestra well before that email came in. Mm-hmm. And I'm not at all singling out this particular organization because this happens quite a bit, where there's something that happens where I found myself needing to program something within 48 to 72 hours. Mm-hmm. And there is no way, or maybe I'm just not gifted enough to do this, but I can't put together a thoughtfully created, curated program in 72 hours if I have all these restrictions, you know?
I agree with that. I mean, you know, I take months, you know, I mean, I'm constantly thinking about programming. I mean, I'm like never not thinking about programming, you know, and I have many spreadsheets that are just sort of sandboxes, you know, where I'm playing around, moving things, this and that and the other. Maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that.
Well, maybe this is what I need to start doing, is just have that ready to go, because I always do it when the requests come in and I'm just not prepared for it. So this is something that maybe I should start doing, is just starting to programs ready to go.
Yeah, maybe, you know, I just have like an ideas spreadsheet, you know, and so where I like, you know, list the piece and the composer and the instrumentation and the length, and then I will like make little pretend programs if it's a piece I'm interested in, you know, sort of pairing it with various different things and stuff like that. Do you guys like programming? Because I have to say it's one of my favorite things about being a conductor. But I know personally conductors who feel very much the opposite way.
I love it. I think it's the signature creative challenge of a conductor. I don't know if you guys ever have this kind of struggle of where people are like, oh, you're a musician, must be so nice to be in a creative field. And you have this feeling of like, it's not really that creative a lot of the time. Programming is the one area that actually truly is creative.
I mean, I find other parts of my job creative, but yeah, I mean, I think that for me, like, I would like to enjoy it more than I do at this current state, just because I'm just usually just so limited, or feel like I am not really able to be creative in this role and this stuff. I'm just kind of like, okay, plug and play, let's just go, which is very disheartening sometimes.
Kensho, when you stop being put into the category of like young conductors who agents are still just trying to run their gamut, what are you excited to like finally be able to slide into your programs and know that people will be like, okay, cool, a little weird, but we'll roll with it? Like, what does that category look like for you right now?
I really want to do Matistemaler, the Hindemith, at some point. I'm also as part of this. Well, this is a whole other thing that I don't think we've talked about on the on the GabFest, but through coaching this actress in Montreal, I've gotten to know Schoenberg's Pelléas and Mélisande, which is like an unbelievable.
Yeah,
it's an unbelievable score. Huh. Like I'm just like dying to do it now, which is really funny. I've like taught like somebody how to conduct it, and I'm just like, oh, I want to do this now. Mm-hmm. So those are two pieces right now on my like forefront of my mind. Like, oh, how do I get this into programming? That
would be a fun segment sometime for us to do our bucket list pieces to conduct.
Or like oh, it's not bucket list even. It's like weird ass kind of white elephantish, like boondoggle kind of pieces. I mean, this is not a deep seated artistic desire on my part, but I love Respighi's Belkish Queen of Shiva. I just think it's an awesome piece. I just really
I
like
didn't even know it.
Oh, it's so pretty.
Yeah,
I mean,
check it out.
it's extremely excessive. I mean, it is really like the loud movements are the definition of Respighian excess. But the two slow movements are beautiful.
Well, this is really interesting conversation to just go through like our processes, but also this was a great excuse to for me to learn from both of you about programming as well. So thank you for that. We'll move on to our classical mixtape. Tiffany.
In our classical mixtape, we each recommend some music that's caught our ear this week to share with our listeners. So, Will, what do you have this week?
Well, I wanted to recommend a piece from the program that I brought. This is by a familiar composer, but I'm sure it's an unfamiliar piece to many people. This is Gustav Holst's Ode to Death. It's a text by Walt Whitman, I believe, which usually I am like totally anti-Walt Whitman. I really do not like his poetry, but I think that this piece works amazingly well. It's got a lot of that Holstian flavor of the sort of, well, it's got mixed meter for one thing. A lot of it's in 5, a lot of it's in 7, but it's got a lot of that ethereal kind of like Neptune style music in there. And Ode to Death, I mean, what could be more intense than that? So it's a piece that it's for chorus and orchestra, and I think that if more people knew it, more people would like it. If you like Holst, I think that you would like this piece. So here is Holst's Ode to Death.
Okay, great, awesome. Thank you for that, Will. Kensho, you're next.
So as part of this exercise in programming, I know that we limited ourselves to things that we have programmed, but I'm bringing something from the mixtape where there's part of a dream program that I haven't yet been able to do that I think I've told you guys before, of pairing Tchaikovsky's Iolanta, the opera, with Nutcracker. Oh. Because when this opera was premiered, it was a double bill of Iolanta and Nutcracker, which seems to me like an interminable evening.
Yeah, I hope you mean like a Nutcracker suite or something for your program.
Well, okay, so this is my dreams to do like Act 1 of Nutcracker first, because I don't necessarily love Act 2 as much as I love Act 1. So do Act 1 of Nutcracker and then Iolanta.
Which is like a one-act opera, right?
It's a one-act opera. And like in some weird way, it's kind of this connection of like Clara becoming Iolanta. Like she goes off with the prince and then ends up being like a blind princess in the story of Iolanta. So I bring to you Robert's Aria from Iolanta, which is one of my favorite moments from that opera. And this is sung by the great Dmitri Tchaikovsky.
Сверкающей искрами черных очей, как на небе звезды осенних ночей, со страстною негой лети на полно, мне все опьяняет, мне все опьяняет и жжет, как вино. Она только взглянет, как молния.
Fantastic. Well, that sounds like a lot of Tchaikovsky in one evening, but I guess it's no more than what we would get if we actually just went to the Nutcracker. So
Exactly.
Okay, I thought we would know this piece, but since Kensho mentions that he doesn't, I'm going to throw in Martinu's Memorial to Lidice. This is the Czech Philharmonic. You'll find the link to all these and to our full classical mixtape playlist in the show notes.
And with that, it's time to wrap up this episode of the Classical Gabfest. I'm William White, and on behalf of Tiffany Liu and Kensho Watanabe, I'd like to thank you so much for listening and to encourage you to subscribe and rate us on your podcast app. We'd also love your help spreading the word about the show on social media, where you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can reach us at classicalgabfest@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, happy listening, and we'll be with you next week.
I don't know how to say this. Help?
Czech Philharmonic?
No.
Jiří Bělohlavek.
Oh my god, I hate you, Will.
This is the Czech Philharmonic.